Hi, good afternoon and welcome to this webinar. This webinar is being recorded so that we can show it at other times, and we also know that some students sign up for webinars and plan to watch them at a later time, which is fine as well. So whether you're watching this live or whether you're watching it at a later date, welcome. It's good for you to be here. So I'm Joanne Boys and I'm one of the careers advisors for UCLan Careers. And this presentation is all about how to prepare for placements. So what we hope you to be able to get out of this is that you will be able to describe at least 5 different ways to prepare for a placement. Now, the where this is going to work is that I'll be mainly telling you things, but if you do want to ask any questions, you can put those into the chat box. The way the webinar is set up on an Adobe is that I can't actually see you, but if you want to ask any questions, you can put them in the chat box. On the recording, you won't actually be identified in the chat box. So if you've put your full names in as a participant, it will be anonymised when we put this out for the people to see. So this session is more about how to prepare to make the most out of a placement rather than actually how to get a placement. Although there is a link at the end, so that if you're in the position where you are looking for a placement yourself, there's some advice on that. So there are lots of different placements that students at UCLan can do. So I can see from the people who've shown interest in this, we've got a variety of different backgrounds. So some people are doing social work, which is absolutely essential for them to do a placement. Some are doing psychology. Some nurses have signed up as well. Some are doing courses where it's part of the course, but it's not essential. It could be voluntary. So we know it varies a lot. So there are different kinds of placements. So depending on your placement, there might be different guidance from your course itself, but there are still things that you can do to make the most out of that placement for yourself. So first of all, in preparing, know what your course is expecting you to do in terms of that placement. So it could be in terms of you actually finding the placement for yourself and getting it approved, or it could be that you'll be given a placement by your course and you don't get any choice. It does vary. There could be particular dates that you're going on placement, so make sure you know those early so that you can be prepared and know what's going on. It could be that there's particular documentation that you might need to complete for the placement. So you might need to do a review regularly. You might need to document your reflections on the placement. You might need to tick off that you've had certain sorts of experiences or met certain clients. It could be very, very specific for some kinds of placements, or it might be a lot more open. So it could be that there's no essential thing for your course, it's just you getting the most out of the opportunity when you're there, in which case you'll need to do more preparation to make sure that you do get that experience that you want. There could be some specific paperwork that you need to complete. So there might be an online OneNote book or Google Docs or something that your department sets up that they want you to complete. And if you need to just do an assignment at the end of your placement, so for example, sometimes they want you to reflect on the placement and say what you've learned, make sure you know what you have to do before you actually go. Because if you leave it till you're finished, you might find that you've not actually covered the things you needed to cover while you're on the placement. So don't just rely on the employer or the person providing the placement to make sure you cover everything. You need to know what it is you need to cover. Also, while we always hope that things will go very, very smoothly, make sure you know what sort of measures are in place in case there are some problems while you're on placement. So, for example, if you were sick for a long period of time, or even short term, you're supposed to let the university know. Or if something happened on placement that you, as an extreme, you might feel you're at risk or health and safety is not being considered enough, what are you supposed to do? So make sure what sort of measures are in place if the university is part of setting up your placement, or if they're giving any guidance on things like that before you go. So secondly, as well as knowing what the course wants from you, make sure that you know what you want to get out of the actual experience yourself. So think about it from a personal point of view. What do you want to get out of it? And for students doing the same kind of course and the same kind of placement, what the individual person wants to get out of it might be a little bit different. So do spend some time thinking about what you want to get out of that placement. So some ideas. So I've put at the first start here, you might want to keep some of these things to yourself rather than when you talk to the employer. So, do have a bit of a filter on your thoughts and what you communicate when you're talking to employers. So in an interview, if they say to you, what do you want to get out of it? You're going to tell them things that are going to be impressive, obviously. You might not tell them some of the things that you kind of keep to yourself that you want to get out of it. So, for example, some people do placements because they just want to try something out. So they want to know, is this really going to be for me in the longer term? And then they try it out. So they might try out a placement in business, in finance, to see if finance is for them. Or they might try project management or whatever it is to see if it's for them in the longer term. Or it could be that if they do something like nursing or social work, where there's a variety of placements, it could be that while you're on that placement, you might be thinking about, well, what sort of job do I need to do afterwards? So if you don't get much choice of your placement, you might be thinking, well, is this environment the kind of place I want to work in the longer term? Or also, what is it about this environment that I like or I don't like to match it to other possibilities later on? So thinking about, is this really for me in the longer term? What do I enjoy about this environment? What do I enjoy about these clients? What might I think is maybe not for me, and consider that for your longer term prospects. It could be simply to get first-hand experience of something that you are passionate about. So sitting and learning about something is very, very different to actually going off and doing it. So it could purely be, I want to get out there and do it. I don't want to wait until my degree's finished if it's an optional placement. Or it's about putting what you've learned into practice for those vocational courses where you've got to do a placement as part of it. Also, think about the opportunity to network. So sometimes people think about networking in terms of kind of a business sense, where they might be thinking about sort of, getting sales contacts, people who work with you and do things sort of financially. But networking applies in any field. So anybody who might be able to offer you advice or support or have information that's useful to you in some way should be part of your network. There's no harm in having somebody on hand for a second opinion who works in a particular field. It's always good to get people on side. And most people are happy to help you in that way. Obviously, be realistic about the support somebody can give you, but a quick 10-minute chat and a catch up about what's going on in their business is probably not too much to ask for anybody. Also think about just making a good impression when you get to your placement. Now, if there is a choice of where you want to go, or if you just happen to get lucky and you're given a placement, you might be lucky enough to have a job as a placement where you would like to work in the longer term. Now that's perfect for some people because it gives you a chance to make a good impression when you're on placement, which will undoubtedly help you to get a graduate role there. So while you would normally still need to go through the process that all applicants go through to get your full-time job after a placement, having been there already gives you that insight into the culture, the way things work, what the priorities are, and you definitely have an advantage about getting a graduate job there. But similarly, it's not always the case that somebody gets a chance to do a placement where they want to work in the end. So also use it as an opportunity to make sure that you can get a good reference for a graduate role that you would go for in the longer term. So placement providers, they do that for lots of different reasons, that they provide placements, and they're not necessarily expecting you to work there afterwards, but they're happy to give you the support and the opportunity to learn and the opportunity to give you a reference to go out into another environment later on. So think about making sure you get that good reference from a placement as well. So 2 different aspects to think about. And then the third aspect to think about in preparing for a placement is to know what the employers are going to want, both while you're on the placement and afterwards as well. Because ultimately, you're going to use the experience you've had on placement to apply for other jobs in the future, just as you would use any work experience you've got as evidence for future employers. So it's really important to know what employers want from you to be able to focus on the things that are most relevant. And there's a few ideas here. So make sure that you've checked out graduate job adverts, and in particular the person specifications. Now, not all graduates would actually label their list of requirements a person specification, but somewhere they would have a list of the kind of person they're looking for. So it might be, say, we need these qualifications, we need this certain knowledge, we need experience of using, it could be particular technical things, particular programs, different ways of working, something to do with the job. And then usually there would be a list of other skills. So things like communication skills, interpersonal skills, team working skills, presentation skills, resilience. The list goes on and on and on. And these kind of transferable skills are just as important as the practical skills. So make sure you're aware of what potential employers would want. If you haven't decided exactly what you would want to do after a placement, then check out a few different employers and what they're saying, so you've got an idea of some contrasting views, because you need something to go on when you're actually on your placement. So if you've got a list of things you know you might need to evidence later on, then you can look for that evidence. So 2 is check out transferable and employability skills generally, because you never know what's going to come in useful. And often when I'm speaking to students and they're doing applications, a student who's got work experience through a placement finds they've got lots of opportunities to give evidence for those transferable employability skills. You will get some from a university course, you can get things from part-time jobs, but placements are ideal because they give you something that's usually in the same context as the job that you're going to do. So think about those sort of transferable employability skills. There are lists of those on Career Edge. Also, if you look on places like Target Jobs and Prospects, there's lists of employability skills and explanations. Also, check out job profiles on Prospects. So the job profiles on Prospects aren't real vacancies that are able to apply for now always. There's links to where you can find vacancies, and there is a vacancy section on Prospects. But if you look on the job profiles, it gives you an overview of typically this is what they want in this kind of career and this sort of job. So if you look at the job profiles that's relevant to you, there's a list of skills and qualities that's really easy to refer back to. So have a look on there. Also check out what your placement provider says that they want you to get from the experience. So there could be some specific knowledge, there could be some specific ways of working they want you to know about. So make sure you're clear on what those are so that you can identify those as you're going along. And also employers are going to want you to be professional, accountable, use your initiative. And really, although you are learning and you don't know everything, which is fine, you still need to show that you're ready to learn, you're ready to ask questions, you'll take on responsibility appropriately, but you'll refer to people above you when necessary. So that's what employers want. Somebody who wants to take responsibility for their own learning, have a professional attitude, turning up on time, being ready, getting a good night's sleep, all those sorts of things that you know about already, but being ready to learn and, as they go along, recognising when they've learnt more, when they need to refer, when they can take more responsibility for themselves. So those 3 aspects to think about. And also think about how you're going to record what you need to remember during your placement. So if it's a short placement, then you might think, well, I'll do it every day. I'm only there for a week, so I'll spend 10-15 minutes every day writing things down. If it's a longer term placement, that might not be realistic. You might think, well, I'll do it every week, every 2 weeks. So really think about how you're going to record things. So you might think, right, I'll do a blog if it's appropriate for things to be public, or I'll do things on social media if it's appropriate to be public. So it might be that you're doing a placement that involves social media, in which case that would be a record of what you do in the social media that you put out. Or it might need to be more private. So it could be on OneNote, so it's only shared with you and your tutor if that's what they want. You might just keep a diary. You might go for handwritten because that's the easiest way for you to do it. You might want to do it all online for it's easier for you to search. Just have a think about how you might want to do it. Think about whether you want to be sort of targeting specific criteria and have things to refer back to, or are you just going to write down everything and then reflect on it later? So have a plan, because it's amazing how much can go on in a couple of days in a placement, and your learning curve can be very steep. So rather than trying to record absolutely everything, you might want to focus on particular things at different times. You might want to record what you're doing on LinkedIn, if that's appropriate. Again, think about your field. If you are a professional working in a support role with the general public, so nurse, social worker, police, you probably don't want to be on LinkedIn. But if you're a business professional, if it's more public what you're doing, then you might want to be on LinkedIn. So think if it's appropriate. And you can kind of do a summary on LinkedIn, write some posts, update your skills on there as you go along. Think about handwritten electronic. If you know you're going to be travelling to your placement on the bus or the train, you might think, well, actually, it's easy to do it on my phone or a tablet, or easy to write things down, whatever's good for you. And also think about your timings. So every week, every day, every month, what's going to work best? How quickly are you going to be able to forget things? When do you need to recall things? So you might think, well, I'll write some notes every day just to remind me, and I'll think about in more depth every week, or whatever makes sense. There could be specific requirements of your course about what they want you to do. So they might say, we need you to fill this in and complete it on these times and submit at these periods. So obviously bear that in mind and find out about that. And if they've got a specific template as well, make sure you use that. Or you might want to create your own. So if you're going to reflect on things, that's where the learning comes from often. So as well as learning from people who are just telling you stuff, reflecting on things makes a difference. So there's a really handy resource on Career Edge, which I'm hoping the link will work. Not sure if it wants to. I think I'll go back to that at the end. Anyway, so it's about reflecting on your experiences as you go through. And also there's a really good checklist here as well. So it's suggesting things like making sure you say thank you to people, which sounds obvious, but actually, as somebody who works with students on a day-to-day basis and seeing people in person, it does stand out when students actually say thank you. Quite a lot of students do, but not everybody. So when students at the end of interviews with me, when they say, oh, thank you, that's helped, or thank you for your time, it does make them stand out a little bit. So bear that in mind when you're doing your experience. And obviously say thank you at the end, but the variety of people you get to meet during the experience, just say thank you for your time, thanks for sharing this with me. It can make a really good impression. Also think about having contact details for people. If you want them to be a reference, have that conversation. Don't just assume, oh, they'll be a reference, it'll be fine. It's much better to ask them. Because in some cases, I have been aware, not very often, but in some cases I've been aware that people have put somebody down for a reference, and then that person has said to me, I wouldn't want to provide a reference because actually they didn't give a very positive impression, and I'm going to find it tough to say something good about them. or something happened that meant that they felt they weren't very professional or something. So it's much easier to have a conversation with somebody as you're leaving your placement and say, is it okay if I put you down as a reference? Make sure you've got contact details, make sure they're happy with it. So you've established that at that point. And then we've got some useful resources. So there's some resources on making a good first impression, which is really important to think about. By the time you get to the age of doing placements, you're all probably, well, you're over 18 anyway, 19, 20. You know about making a good impression. You've done it before, but it's worth having a few pointers. So I'll put a link on there. There's a really good section on Career Edge as well about business skills. So things like what to expect in a meeting, how do people take notes, how to construct a memo or a formal email in a business context. Now, not everybody will be working in business, but sometimes there's things going on in a workplace that you're not used to, and you just need something to give you an idea of what's happening. So what to expect from a meeting, how to know a meeting's run well, all kinds of different things. So the business skills section, even if you don't think of your placement as business, it can have lots of useful information there. Also, plan to be resilient. Now, even if things go really, really well in real life, things can go wrong. So, it's not going to be 100% perfect all the time, because life's definitely not like that. So if you read up on being resilient before you go on your placement and have that in mind, then you can be ready to make sure that any setbacks or anything that's, not been brilliant, you can overcome that, and you've got strategies to do that. So don't expect everything to be perfect, because it won't be. And be ready to bounce back from things. When things go wrong, that's often when most learning takes place. And for those people who are still looking for their own placements, I put a link there for the YouTube film that is just all about finding placements and different strategies for doing that if you are responsible for finding your own placement. Okay, so I'm going to see if I can just show you some of these things on Career Edge. What's sharing pod? Share my screen. Okay. So let's go for that. Brilliant. Okay. Just bear with me. Right, so if we go into UConn area, and I'll go in staff, but you go into students. Oh no, don't let me do that. Why are you letting me do that now? See if it let me go the other way. Right, so if you go into Career Edge, this is what you will see as your landing page, this next one. Okay, so the links I've given you will take you into here. You might need to log in, but you should find the stuff you want in. So some of the things that I have suggested are in the career e-learning section. So things like the business skills are in here. So as you can see, there's loads of things, but things like customer service, what are they talking about? Data protection, that's something that comes up for every area. How to manage meetings, how to negotiate. You might need to do some project management, ideas of working as a team, health and safety, all really good stuff for going into any working environment. So really good business skills in there. And then what you can also do is just search on here. So if I just do search on resilience, it gives you some ideas of being resilient, how to cope, other ideas as well. There's a whole section on developing resilience. I've given you a link to give you ideas on that as well. What were the other things in here? Yeah. So there were things on reflection as well. Okay, so reflection on work experience. Tells you about having your goals, thinking about reflecting. It's also in here. It was this one. This is the one I've given you the link to. So 3 questions to reflect on your experiences, which I like this because it's a really good, simple way of doing it. Now, I know that probably on your screen you can't read this, but you can read the title. So it's a structure of 3 bits. So it's what are you reflecting on? So talk about what you've done. So what? What does that mean to you? What did you learn? What's important? And then now what? So what happens next? What else do you need to find out about? Or how would you do things differently in the future? Or what does this mean for your career? So that's quite a good, really easy way of reflecting on your experiences. It could be that the course that you're doing, if it's a formal placement, they might want you to do a particular way of reflecting on what happens, and they might have a different structure suggested, but that's quite a good one there. So just a few of the things there on Career Edge that can show you what's that are useful for that. Okay, so get rid of that one. Okay, so all the links I've given you will take you to those resources. So the last thing just to ask you is if you would give us some feedback if you're watching this live, that would be great. So we just ask you to give your feedback by rating 1 to 5. So 1 was a bit rubbish, you didn't learn very much. 5 is fantastic, you learnt loads. So if you want to just put a number 1 to 5 in the little box, that would be great. And if there's any other comments you want to make, then you're very welcome to do that as well. So, got a question, right? So, would a placement then be the same as a graduate scheme job because there are so many names and it gets confusing? No. So, if something is called a graduate scheme, then that is intended only for people who have finished their degree. They are very different. Some of the principles of making the most of your learning and so on that I've discussed are relevant for any context, whether it's a permanent job or a placement. But a graduate scheme is usually a graduate scheme that you would do once you've graduated. Is a placement compulsory for pharmacy students? Yes. So if you are studying pharmacy, I know that you do go on placement. As I'm not part of the pharmacy course, I can't tell you where and when and how, but I do know they've got a department that coordinate the placements and they send you somewhere. Oh, thank you for the numbers as well. That's great. If you contact your hub or your course leader and say, who do I ask for more information about placements, they should be able to tell you. So what's the best way to spend summer? Oh, I like that question. So one of the good ways of spending summer is, it could be a bit late to try and get a job now over summer, but you could still look and see what opportunities are there. One of the things you could do over summer is make the use of these webinars and make use of the resources on Career Edge. There are lots of webinars you can watch back on YouTube as well as attending the new ones that are running. The careers advisors and I are trying to do something different every day. So some of the things are very relevant for particular subject areas. Other things are very general, but we are trying to make things different. So keep looking out for webinars. That's a good way to spend summer. The other thing you could do over summer is make sure you've got a CV that's ready to go. So do some research into the sort of job you want to do and create a CV for that. That's also something useful you can do. And you could get that checked by careers advisors using Ask Careers. You can do that over summer as well. So somebody said they've learned stuff, that's great. Is it by placement? So I'm not sure if the pharmacy department use the term placement. I think they do. But all that I mean in terms of a placement is an opportunity to go into a workplace that is not your full-time workplace where there's an emphasis on learning. That's all I'm talking about in terms of a placement. Would a placement not be useful for a graduate? What's your opinion? Okay, so once you've graduated, it might be that you would find a short-term opportunity that would help you in terms of your future career. But most employers offering placements tend to want people who are still doing their degree. So if an employer is happy for you to do a placement once you finish your degree, then that's not a problem at all. But most employers tend to look for placements while you're doing your degree. So just check if they're saying this is for second year students or this is for summer between any years or whatever. Just see if the employer puts a limit on it. I suppose in terms of practicalities for any graduate looking for jobs, it's probably going to make sense to focus on opportunities that are going to be what you want to do permanently as a graduate. But if there are more temporary opportunities that could be helpful as a stepping stone, then that could be useful. So what's the way to get a placement for pharmacy? I don't know the answer to that because the pharmacy department organises that and they've got a team who organise the placements. So I understand that they actually allocate you somewhere to go, but the method for doing that I don't know. So you would need to speak to the pharmacy department to ask how to get a placement for pharmacy. So the recording will go onto our YouTube channel. So you can watch this back on the YouTube channel. Your names will be anonymised in the chat. So nobody will know who was saying what. That's all anonymous. But yeah, you'll be able to get it on our YouTube channel. There are 2 versions of it on YouTube. So if you just Google preparing for placements, YouTube, UCLan careers, you'll get straight to the film. It's worked on all of them so far. Difference between volunteering and a placement. Well, I suppose volunteering is always going to be where you have given your time for free. A placement could be the same in terms of giving time for free, but a placement could be paid as well. So I suppose that's one of the main differences. In terms of what you'll get out of it, it could be very, very similar. So in many ways, there isn't much difference between volunteering and a placement because it's a way of you getting experience. It's a way of you getting insight. It's a way of you demonstrating skills for future employers. But some people volunteer just because they want to do something without having those things in mind anyway. I know quite a lot of people who finish their careers and then they start doing lots of volunteering. But for students and graduates, I suppose in terms of thinking about your next step, there's not that much difference. The main thing would be, I suppose, being paid. It depends what you're doing, because often if you are wanting to get into something that could be psychology based, for instance, it's impossible to get a placement where you would be paid. They're like hen's teeth. They're very, very hard to find if they do exist. But there are lots of opportunities to volunteer and get experience in supporting people in different contexts. Okay, so I think I'll leave it there. There's one last slide just to remind you about our other services. If you want to ask some further questions, you're very welcome to do that. And if you want some specific answers about your situation or just want to have a catch up and just talk through with somebody where you're up to, what you're thinking about, you're very welcome to do that. No problem at all. All our services are still available online. We're doing our appointments by Teams meetings. As you can see, we're doing webinars like today. If you want to book those, go on to Career Edge. Our contact details are there, so our email and phones are still working and so on. But thank you for joining me today. It's always great when I have some actual company live to do these as well, so thank you for that, and thank you for all your questions. That's fantastic.